Hello students, I welcome you to my video channel Dear Students, and I'm Liladuna Sinha. My intention is to help out the students who find English language IGCSE specification A difficult, and I have selected the lesson Disabled by Wilfred Owen, and I'm planning to do the rest of the lessons that appear in the anthology, and let's get started. The poem goes on like this. Disabled by Wilfred Owen. He sat in a wheelchair waiting for dark and shivered in his ghastly suit of grey. Legless seemed short at elbow. Through the park, voices of boys rang, saddening like a hymn. Voices of play and pleasure after day, till gathering sleep had mothered them from him. Now let's see what the writer is trying to show with the indication of the very title of the poem. We call it title. And here the title carries negative connotations because at the very mentioning of the title, we don't have any positive impression about someone being disabled. And it also indicates that the person would have been disabled as a result of an injury. It could be warfare. It is not so clear, but it captures the content matter of the poem. As we read through, we understand that it contains the subject matter of the poem. He sat in a wheelchair waiting for dark and shivered in his ghastly suit of grey. Now, here it is a scenario where a soldier is handicapped by warfare and is confined to a wheelchair and he's waiting for dark. Darkness can be interpreted in many ways. As for example, when you say darkness, it could refer to the darkness, like in other words, dusk. But here, literally speaking, it could be the darkness in terms of the sense of sorrow that blankets him and how anxious he is, how worried and sorrowful the soldier is having been confined to a wheelchair. So there we can say the poet brings into focus the pathetic realities of warfare. And shivered in his ghastly. So see the carefully chosen diction here. Shivered, ghastly, grey. So with these words also, I think the writer is trying to showcase the sort of gloomy or the gruesome realities of warfare. And there is something called sound effect. So with that ghastly and grey, so it is a repetition of a consonant sound. So you could say that it creates an alliterative effect. So if there is a repetition of a consonant sound, you call it alliterative effect. So here ghastly and grey with a very kind of gruff sound creates the horrors of warfare, like enables us to imagine how horrific and gruesome warfare is and how it handicaps people. Legless, soon short at elbow. So this is a place where the poet goes into detail about how he actually physically handicapped by warfare, like legless and short at elbow. So he's not a complete man anymore. Through the park, voices of boys rang, saddening like a hymn. So here, this is another scenario where you see the boys running about, playing and all. And there is something called contrast. So you can say this merriment, joy of the boys stands in contrast to the soldier's pathetic plight of having to confine to a wheelchair. Voices of play and pleasure. Here also the poet uses alliteration, or you can say the poet employs the technique of alliteration in bringing forth the sense of merriment, till gathering sleep had mothered them from him. So here the poet is talking about sleep, and I hope you can remember at the very outset of the poem, the poet says dark. So that also has literal and figurative meanings, as much as the sleep too carries literal, figurative. Literally speaking, it could be the sleep, but then figuratively it could mean death. So It seems, I mean, to me, it sounds as if the the soldier is waiting until death approaches him because the life has lost its vitality, life has lost all joys, and there's no point living anymore. Let's move on to the next one. And they are the stanza starts off like this. We call them stanzas, right? And the second stanza starts off as, about this time town used to swing so gay, when glow lamps budded in the light blue trees and girls glanced lovelier as the air grew dim. In the old times, before he threw away his knees, now he will never feel again how slim girls' waist, how warm their subtle hands, all of them touching like some queer disease. Let's start off with the last one. It's like everyone is touching him as if he's having a queer disease. And the queer disease could be synonymous to how he suffers after this, after he suffered casualties, and that stands in contrast to town used to swing so gay, where the poet must be referring to the time before he joined the forces, before he got himself recruited. When he was a young man. Town swing so gay. Before he joined, before he was kind of handicapped, before he was paralyzed by warfare, he was a young man who enjoyed life in the company of girls. That shows like how he attracted the world, because he was a complete man. And glow lamps budded in the light blue trees. So this is a powerful metaphorical representation of youth and joy that is inseparably connected to youth. And the girls glance lovelier. So with the repetition of there's a lot of, the poet makes a very fine use of alliterative effect. And here also G sound is repeated. You can say that it's a kind of like the poet uses or employs this alliterative effect in order to create a sense of like joy, and the fact that he was quite attracted by the girls, and then he will never feel again how slim girls is. At the time that he enjoyed his life to the maximum, that time will never come back. And then all of them touch him like queer disease, so the kind of discrimination and rejection he suffers, by that being rejected by the outside world, how he suffers. And then let's move on to the third stanza, and there the poet starts off as, there was an artist silly for his face, for it was younger than his youth last year. Now he is old, his back will never brace, he's lost his color very far from here, poured it down shell holes till the veins ran dry, and half his lifetime lapsed into hot rays and leap of purple spurted from his thigh. There was an artist silly for his face. So that's about the youth and how younger he looked. And was younger than his youth. The poet is very specifically saying how younger, like how he was spending this youth and how attractive he looks last year. So that is all past, that doesn't really belong to him anymore. Now, so the poet with the use of a time expression now is trying to show through contrast the sort of change that is brought about by war, the so-called warfare. Now he is old. Now the youth is not there, not even a trace of youth can be seen. So now he is old. So with that, the poet brings into focus the kind of calamity caused by war, even though some poets romanticize warfare. This is the reality of war, or in other words, the gruesome realities of warfare. So it says, he's old, his back will never brace. So the kind of injuries that you have suffered, you'll never fix them. Poured it down shell holes till the veins. So here, shell holes. So this is a sort of lexical, a kind of a term that has been taken straight away from Battlefront. So there the poet makes us familiar with this kind of scenario that the soldier, the young man, put himself in. So here it says like, poured down in shell holes till the veins ran dry, and half his lifetime lapsed. So we see how the change is brought about. That is utterly negative because his bubbling youth and artist Sisyphus, he was a young man and the girls surrounded him wherever he went. But now he was discriminated, rejected after the warfare, and his lifetime lapsed into hot race, leap of purple spurted from the thighs, the kind of injury he suffered as a result of being part of this warfare. I hope you understand until this point, and let's move on to the next one. One time he liked blood smear down his leg after the matches carried shoulder high. It was after football when he drunk peg. He thought he'd better join. He wonders why. Someone had said he looked like a god in kilts. Now here, it's another place where the poet actually introduces a moment where the young man suffered an injury. But here, the sort of melancholic tone that you see in the previous stanza is not found here, because it says blood smeared down the leg after the matches and he was carried shoulder high. So it's a kind of like the blood smearing down. The young man at that point would have liked it, because the kind of victory and how he has dedicated himself on winning the match, and like he was carried shoulder high, so he was like in high spirits. He was feeling over the moon, and how he was like recognized by the world outside, in contrast to how he's rejected right now as a soldier who is a soldier who has suffered injuries in the warfare and matches carried shoulder high. It was after football when he had drunk peg, he thought he'd better join. So it is with this sense of merriment that he got this idea of getting himself recruited. And so this is a sort of kind of like he thinks about his life in retrospect, and you know, like the kind of decisions that have been made in his life. He thought he'd better join. He wonders why. Someone had said he looked like God in kilts. So this is the sort of attire of a soldier that the young men are mostly attracted to. That's why, and maybe too to please his. So the kind of reasons that would have let the young person get himself recruited are in a way very kind of like very narrow, because it's just that he wanted to please Meg, the girls that surrounded him, or maybe the fact that he came victorious after the matches, and with that sense of merriment would have kind of like encouraged him to be part of this warfare. That's why, and maybe to please his Meg. That was it. Please the giddy jaws. And asked to join, he didn't have to beg. Smiling, they wrought his lie, aged 19 years. So this is the sort of scenario where when the young men join the forces, even though they are underaged, they were recruited. So even smiling, they wrought the lie. So it's a lie. He was underaged, yet he was willing to join, and they were willing to recruit him. So it's a lie, aged 19 years, by then he was not. Germans he scarcely thought of, all their guilds and Austrias did not move him. So it's not the country or maybe the war, the reason as to why they fight. That was none of his concerns. It's just the moment of merriment and excitement made him join warfare. And it was highly, the very decision of joining was encouraged by the girls around him. And it's the societal, the kind of encouragement he received from the world outside also would have been one of the reasons as to why he ultimately ended up joining. And Austrians did not move him, and no fear of fears came yet. Yet suggests the fact that it is yet to come. It had not hit him yet that means it's yet to come, the fears. So he was not afraid of joining, because he didn't know how gruesome it was, because as a young man, he was inexperienced, he had no exposure to the gruesome realities of war. So it's a kind of a mistake that a kind of a blunder that had been committed, which ultimately turned his life topsy-turvy. And then he thought of jeweled hills for daggers in plaid socks and smart salutes. So the sound effects, see, a lot of sibilants here, the usage of sibilants or the employment of sibilant socks and smart salutes. So with that, the writer shows the kind of like the reasons, the silly reasons which ultimately encourage the people to take these kind of decisions of joining forces or be part of warfare. So with the use of sibilants, the writer shows like how narrow-minded the young men are in joining warfare, not knowing the gruesome realities, care of arms and leave and pay arrears. And then you get, and soon he was drafted out with drums and cheers. So here, let's move on to the next one. Some cheered him home, but not as crowds. Even though he was sent to the battlefront with drafted out with drums and cheers, he was sent with drums and cheers. Like when he was sent to the battlefield, the world around him cheered. But as he returned, you get some cheered him. So see the contrast. This Wilfred Owen is a poet who wanted to show the reality of warfare. So here he says, some cheered him home, but none, not as crowds cheer Gaul. So not the time that he, not like the time that he was part of this team, part of the team and won, and blood smearing down and people carried him shoulder high. That was past. It's not the same cheer that you receive this time. Crowds of cheer Gaul, not like that. Only solemn man who brought him fruits thanked him and then inquired about his soul. So see the kind of passive reaction by the world that was made by the world outside, which stands in contrast to how he was carried shoulder high and how he was respected and recognized, and his presence and his victory was acknowledged by the world outside. Nothing is found here. Then let's move on to the last one. Now he'll spend a few sick years in institutes and do what things the rules consider wise, and take whatever pity they may dole. Tonight he noticed how the women's eyes passed him from the strong men that were whole. So this line is very important and stands in fine contrast to the opening line where you see the soldier being confined to a wheelchair. Now, because at that point he was not a complete man, because he was physically handicapped, somebody who is waiting until death comes and embraces him. And here it says, passed him from the strong men that were whole. So there were strong men who might not have joined the warfare. They were whole, they were complete people, physically. And psychologically also the soldier suffers a lot. And he was waiting for death because he cannot withstand his suffering, the emotional trauma, psychological trauma he undergoes as a result of being ripped off the joy that he enjoyed as a young man in the company of the world outside. Now it says, how cold and late it is. Why don't they come and put him into bed? Here again the image of bed along with the word, I think you remember the word sleep right at the beginning. And literally speaking, sleep could be death. So the only thing you could look for is death. So here, put him into bed. Why don't they come? So how eagerly he is waiting until death comes and takes him. Because life has lost every joy. So there he feels there's no point of living. So with that, I'm gonna wind up my lesson and hope to meet you with another lesson that appears in IGCSE specification A. Goodbye.